Hello, everyone. I'm Clint Dawson. I'm the chair of the Department of Aerospace Engineering and Engineering Mechanics. And we're very excited to welcome alumnus George Davis, the founder and CEO of Emergent Space Technologies, back to campus to speak with us this afternoon. George is a great friend of the department and also the university. I want to thank all of you who are attending in person and also virtually. So today, Dr. Davis will share his experiences with starting his space company and growing and maintaining it for over 20 years. He will discuss his origin story, doing business with civil, military, and commercial space customers, and comment on recent transformations in industry ushered in by the new space era. Dr. Davis will also offer advice to students interested in entrepreneurship with time for Q&A as well. And we're going to have a reception after the talk out here in the lobby. Some of you may have recently seen the Austin American Statesman story earlier this year that featured Austin as an emerging hub for the aerospace industry. We were really excited to see this story as we are beginning stages of getting our new Launch Texas program off the ground. This new comprehensive program will combine world-class technical and entrepreneurial education, fundamental and applied space research, and international outreach and partnerships. As part of Launch Texas, we are also now offering a specialization in space tech entrepreneurship at the graduate level in collaboration with the Texas Innovation Center and Texas Venture Labs in the McCombs School of Business. This new program combines engineering, business, entrepreneurship, and more information will be available on our website soon, or you can contact Professor Noel Clemens, who's sitting here for more details. Launch Texas also features bringing in speakers like George to provide our students with firsthand knowledge and experience within the world of space tech entrepreneurship. So I'd like to thank George for taking the time to come and speak with us today. And just before I turn it over to him, here's a few facts about George. He received his Ph.D. in Aerospace Engineering from UT Austin with a focus on precise orbit determination of low altitude satellites using the Global Positioning System. He received his MS in Aerospace on-orbit assembly operations for lunar and Mars spacecraft, as well as his BS in Aerospace, also from UT Austin. Prior to starting Emergent, George worked at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, providing GPS systems engineering, algorithm development, receiver testing, and data analysis support to a variety of missions. At the peak of the internet bubble, George joined AppNet Systems to transition into the information technology industry and supported the development of web portals for the federal government and e-commerce exchanges. It was there that he saw the opportunity to apply modern software development principles and technology to the aerospace industry and decided to start Emergent in 2001. After George is finished speaking, as I mentioned, we'll have Q&A and we'll have a reception outside, so we invite all of you to join us afterward. So George, we're looking forward to learning about your experience, and take it away.
Thank you, Clint.
So when Clint invited me to speak to Aerospace, I couldn't resist to come back and tell my story. And I want to thank you for the invitation and thank, like he did, everyone who came out personally to see this. I know with COVID and all that, it could have been easy just to stay and do it on Zoom, but it's really good to see people out in the audience. I didn't really intend to start a company. I mean, I always had this idea in the back of my mind, and from a very early age, like in undergraduate, as you'll see, I always thought about it, but I never had kind of this, eureka moment. So I thought long and hard about what the title of my talk would be and how I would present my story and that of my company. And it struck me that I was just this, unintentional entrepreneur, and the opportunity came and I saw it and I seized the moment because I didn't want to have regret not having tried it. I didn't want to look back 20 years later and say, man, I should have started that company. I should have done it. So I gave it a shot, and 20 years later, I've been successful at it, and it's been a blast. But it's been a very interesting and hard and arduous journey. So, I'll just get into it and talk about it. First, I'm going to start off with the overview of the company to see where we are right now. So we're headquartered in Laurel, Maryland. That's about halfway between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland. And we have a software factory here in Austin. It's up at Lamar and 183. And we started that in 2009, and we only had one person in that office. And now we have about 25 people. So that's about a quarter of our company. Our core competencies are in guidance, navigation, control, position, navigation, and time, orbital mechanics. This looks like the curriculum of the Aerospace department here at the University of Texas, and there's no, it's not by accident. Like the first 7 out of probably 10, 12 people I hired were students from University of Texas that went to graduate school here. Because I knew what I was getting. I was getting smart people, and I knew the professors that they worked for, and so I could validate, yeah, these guys are smart. And I got them to move up to Maryland, and that helped us get started. But I really, wanted to get into software. I just saw that as being the future of the industry. So that was another aspect of some of those early hires. And now we're getting into autonomy, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And again, I think this is the future of the aerospace industry. So our biggest customer is NASA. But over the last several years, we've been doing a lot more work for the Defense Department, the new Space Force. DARPA is a big research agency for the DoD. There's a new organization called the Space Development Agency, which is kind of transforming the architecture for how military space will be developed using constellations of small satellites. The Air Force Research Laboratory in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And most recently, we've been engaging commercial space. So we have about 95 employees. It's probably 97, 98 since the time I put these slides together. We've made a couple more hires. They're mostly engineers and scientists and software developers, but we do still have about 10% of our staff is comprised of Texas Longhorns, hook 'em. And over half of our employees have a master's degree or Ph.D., which is actually really, really high for the industry and certainly for a company of our size. But just the nature of what we do, we work in lots of small teams with, sometimes 1, 2, 3, 5 people, and they have to hit the ground running. And so I found that, master's degrees who write software is almost like our ideal hire. Those are the kinds of people that we look for. So if you are working on your master's and you write software, send us a resume because we're hiring. And this is what our business footprint looks like. So, we're all the way up over there in the Chesapeake Bay area in Maryland. While it looks like most of the company is on the west side of the Mississippi, in fact, those are just some of our customer sites. So, but we work in 6 different states in 4 different time zones, and with internet and cell phones and Southwest Airlines and Teams, we can do a lot of projects. We've been doing distributed engineering for over probably 15 years now. So when COVID hit and everyone had to go home and work from home, we had almost no disruption at all. In fact, our company grew under COVID, and I think it was because we were already well prepared for doing this like internet-based collaboration. Is it the best way? No, but it is a way of doing it, and we've been successful at it. So I threw this up here just to show how our company has grown in time, right? You have these peaks and valleys, and there have these periods where you might stay roughly level for a while, but in business, you're either getting bigger or you're getting smaller. And we're always writing proposals, always, never not writing proposals. And sometimes you win a lot and the company grows, and sometimes you don't win that many, and you either stay the same or you go down a little bit. But my main job as the CEO of the company is really sales and customer relationship management and trying to position the company for continued growth and success. Like I said, most of our revenue comes from NASA. That's NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, NASA Ames Research Center in Mountain View, California, and NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. But we've really diversified our portfolio, and we're working more with the DoD, and there's really, really cool and interesting projects. They're really pushing the envelope on small satellite technology and using them for tactical, military, and intelligence purposes. When I first started the company, it was almost all technical services, which is basically providing staff to NASA and other federal customers who have lots more money than they have civil servants to work, so they have big contractor populations. If you go down to Johnson Space Center, there's significantly more contractors than there are civil servants. And you're likely to get a job at JSC working for a contractor than you are as a civil servant. They typically hire through their intern program. But over time, we've been putting more emphasis on technology development, flight software for autonomous satellite constellations and clusters and formations. And so we've been doing more what we call advanced programs. We've since now changed the company to where we have a product division and an R&D division. In 2021, it started to diverge again, but I think in 2022, it's going to come back together. And we do a lot of R&D through the SBIR and STTR program. And this chart's only important to note that we win about 30% of those proposals, 30 to 35%. And the industry average is something like 15%. So we have a very good process for coming up with the ideas, developing the proposals, but then you got to execute, right? You got to execute. When you win a contract, that's the first part of the battle. Next part is actually delivering on that and building up that reputation to where the customers want to give you more money. And this is what we look like on the web. You could go check us out on our website. It's your first public-facing, marketing tool, if you will, that customers see and competitors see and teammates see. So check us out. We've got a career page if you're looking for a job. Like I said, we're hiring. Now my origin story. So I'd like to say that there was this eureka moment where I had this really good idea and I thought, I'm going to start a company and I'm going to do this, that, or the other. That's not really how it happened. It took a long time to get there. And of course, everything starts at Texas, right? So, and I got to give a shout out to Dr. Fowler because I was in his design class, senior design class, and they ran the class such that we had companies. And I had to compete to be the president of the company, and I won it. And now I had to run this, student project. What you guys are doing now blows away what we did 35 years ago. I'm just so in awe of the students here. But back then, it was cutting edge educational technology. And you learned a lot about dealing with people and trying to motivate people and having deadlines. And that was kind of the first thing where I thought, maybe I'm at least cut out for management, And then I went to this really cool thing called International Space University. And this was the second year of ISU, and it was in Strasbourg, France. This is, right before the fall of communism, and the Berlin Wall came down, and there was all these students from the Soviet Union and China and Western Europe and Canada and the US. And everyone there was smart and everyone there was interesting. And it was just a great summer. And it was another, they split 120 students into two enormous projects. And I was a part of that management effort. And that's another time where I thought, maybe I could do this. I finished my graduate degree in '96, and the first thing I did was do a postdoc at University of Colorado. And I really thought I wanted to get on faculty. I thought I wanted to be a professor. I loved my time at the university. I loved research. And I loved the professors that I had. And I really thought that, if I could be like them, that would be like a great career. And that's kind of what drew me to go into academia. But our first son was born in Boulder, and I couldn't afford to, live there on postdoc salary. So I started looking for jobs, and that eventually brought me to Goddard Space Flight Center. And I was a contractor for what was then Orbital Sciences Corporation now, which is now Northrop Grumman. They got bought a couple times. But when you're a contractor, you really work for the NASA center. You're kind of an extension of their workforce. And the natural progression is you come in through the contractor force, and then when they look to hire a full-time civil servant, they pick the contractors that they liked the best. And they offered me a job. Glenn Lightsey was my civil servant advisor or leader. And he left NASA to come here to UT and take a job here and start small satellite lab. And so they offered me his civil servant position, but I couldn't take the pay cut. We just bought a house. We just had our second child. We had minivan payment. I couldn't take $100 a month pay cut. They wanted me to take a $1,000 a month pay cut. And I just couldn't do it. I would have taken the job. I liked the idea of the job, but in some cases, money doesn't matter. And in that case, I said, you know what, I'm going to look for something else. And turned out that something else was the internet. And this was raging hot in the late 90s and the early 2000s when everyone, every company, every enterprise needed a website. And the government was going electronic. And there's all these companies that were springing up to develop websites and electronic exchanges. And AppNet actually got bought by Commerce One, which was a spectacular failure. And in 2001, when it was clear that the internet bubble had burst, and I really missed aerospace, I mean, that's what I always loved, that's what I was trained in, I thought, you know what, maybe this is the time. I had worked at NASA long enough to have friends who were, many of them were PhDs from UT who went up there to be aerospace engineers, and they had interesting projects that they needed help on. And I asked, hey, I'd like to come back into aerospace, and I could like to come back and work for you guys. And they're like, oh, that'd be awesome. And I said, but could I do it on my own, like as my own company? And they're like, yeah, sure. I don't know how you would do that. And I know there's a lot of paperwork that has to be done, but yeah, go ahead. So that's when I started thinking about it. And long story short is, I started the company in 2001. And so, it was a real long climb to get to that point. I was 36 years old. And the opportunity that I saw was, I'm unhappy at this IT company. I want to go back into aerospace. But I saw how modern software was being developed. I understood now what software engineering was. And I saw that they designed, developed, integrated, tested, and deployed software just like we do for satellites. And I said, if I could take that and I could apply that to guidance, navigation, control, because in 2000, 2001, NASA Goddard was really interested in satellite formation flying. And we're talking about, and constellations. And we're talking about, anywhere from 5 to 30. I saw some, designs that had 60 satellite constellations. Well, back then the satellites were way too big and the launch vehicles were way too expensive. And so I didn't have really much of an opportunity to do that from a technology standpoint. So I started a services company. And this is the zeitgeist of 2001. When I started the company, it was August 27th of 2001. Our third child, our daughter, was born on September the 13th, just 2 days after September 11th. And she should have been born on the 12th, but I just think because of we're in the hospital and it was just, the atmosphere was not great. And we had a shift change and this nurse came in and she said, we're gonna get that baby out right now. And she did. And our daughter was born and I still thought my company may not come about. We're waiting for NASA to have their budget taken away and used for defense purposes, but that never happened. And thankfully, the company started on October 1 and it's been, 20 years. And this is a zeitgeist for 2022. So the world has changed a lot, and COVID is the biggest thing that changed everything. I don't know, does this have there's my kids now, so they're not little children anymore. But I don't know if I could start my company as I did then, right now. Things have changed quite a bit because of COVID. But the biggest change is the aerospace industry itself. So I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. Let me tell you about some challenges of starting your own company. You want to be an entrepreneur? The first thing is getting over the uncertainty, doubt that prevents you from taking risks. All right. I was 35, 36 years old, and I wanted to start this company. And I thought, again, I might not ever get a chance to do this. I got to do this now. I took a bit of a financial risk, but I took a big risk on my perceived reputation, if you will. I was afraid to fail. I was afraid to like go out and tell my family, tell my friends, hey, I'm gonna start a company. And then, a year later, I'm out of business. So if there's one thing that'll motivate you to success, it will be the fear of failure. That's a very powerful motivator. You got to find a customer. You got to find someone who's going to pay you to do something, right? And then you got to find the second one, and you got to find the third. But you got to find that first one. So you got to have someone who's willing to give you a contract. And then you got to learn the game. And I put that in quotes because in the government contracting world, it really is. It's a game, and you got to learn the rules of that game. And you have to know just enough about accounting and finance and legal and human resources until you get big enough to pay people to do this for you. So, I was the accountant for the first couple of years I hired almost everybody for the first 5 or 6 years. And you have to deal with a lot of things that you did not learn in a PhD program in aerospace engineering. Do you need to have an MBA to do this? No. An MBA would be great if you're going to work for a Fortune 500 company that has 30,000 people. To do this for a small business, you just have to have common sense, and you have to be willing to work hard, and you have to be willing to learn some things that you may not have thought you needed to know. Securing a business line of credit with no track record of success. I think it's easier now than it was in 2000, but in 2000, I wrote a check for $10,000, and I went to a bank and I said, I'd like to start a business account. And they're like, well, how long have you been in business? And I said, I haven't been in business. I'm starting this account right now. Here's my $10,000 check. They wouldn't give me the checking account. And I'm like, I'm not asking for a loan. I just want to set up a checking account. They're like, nope, you've not been in business. I went to 3 other banks until I finally found one that would start the account for me. And it was crazy. I thought I didn't understand what the risk was. But about 5 years later, I got a call from that original bank. It was Bank of America, and they're asking me if I was interested in starting an account with them. I'm like, you were the first bank I went to, and you told me no because I did not have any, business history, and now I have business history. So no, thank you. Click. So it's a challenge. You have to really look at this from the perspective of the bank sometimes. This is hard. It's a challenge, finding really good people to join you when you're not very big. I cannot tell you the number of times I've had conversations with people where it sounds like they want to join the company. They sounds like they're really interested. And then you offer them with a written offer, and they're like, oh no, I'm sorry, man. I might just talk to my wife about that. That's we're not gonna be able to do that now. Or, oh, well, I was thinking about going to, there's all these. It's the same one. It goes back up to taking the uncertainty and doubt and fear that prevents you from taking a risk. I took a risk in starting the company, but these people who were going to join me, people I moved up from Texas, joined me and took a risk, and some of them had families, So they have a belief in you that it's going to be successful, and that's not easy to do. It's easier to hire when you got 100 people than when you have 5 people. When you have a company, you're going to deal with difficult people. I'm sure everyone has difficult people in their lives, right? They could be family, they could be friends, they could be professors, they could be students, they could be neighbors. You can walk away from some of those conflicts, but in business, sometimes you're working on a proposal, sometimes you're working on a contract, sometimes you have a difficult customer who has a difficult employee of yours working with them, and you are sometimes a psychologist in addition to being an engineer or a boss. And that's another thing that it can be very challenging. Not everyone is interested in playing that role. Another challenge is just managing the expectations of really smart people. I'm privileged to have a company of many, many people who are way smarter than I am. And they all have careers, they all have lives, they all have expectations, and they all want to be heard, and that's a challenge. Again, it goes back to these social skills, these soft skills that are not necessarily things you pick up in school. So, and I was not, and I'm still not probably the best at it. I tend to be blunt sometimes. People have learned to deal with me on that, especially my business partners. But this is going to be something you'll have to do, especially in the early stages. And handling losing when you're used to winning. I think, I've heard industry-wide, a win rate of like 15 to 20% on proposals is considered good. And some companies, what they'll do is they'll just crank out 30 proposals a year so that they can win, 8 or 9 of them. That's how they sustain their business. You have to have this big business development and proposal writing operation. But no matter what, you're going to lose some contracts that you really wanted to win. And you're going to win some contracts that you're like, okay. But if you're used to winning, get used to losing, because it's going to happen. You can't avoid it. And then balancing your family life with your work life. When I first wrote this, I said balance your work life with your family life. But for me, and for my company, we always say family first. And I think that's something that's changed over the last 20 years. Customers are very, very understanding of that now. And, quite frankly, if your employees aren't happy, the work's not going to get done, and the customer's not going to they're not going to be happy. So, but when you're the CEO, though, you never get to put it down, right? You never get to walk away, even on vacation, it's always there. So, I would have time with my children, we call them daddy days, and I would have like one full Saturday with each one of my kids to do only what they wanted to do, is one with dad. And as they got older, we didn't get to do that as frequently, but it was my time with them. And then my lovely wife who's here, we tried to find time together. You have to plan it out. And thank God I have a calendar on my phone and on my computer, because I could plan these things out now. And it's very important that you're intentional about sharing your time with your family. Risks. Your bruised ego. For some people that's really hard. I've gotten used to it now, so I can take a punch. I learned after a while that I was going to have to kind of give up my technical career to be the businessman, right? I mean, I really enjoyed doing research on GNC and P&T, but now I have others who do that for the company, and I live vicariously through my engineers' awesome work, but my main job is marketing and sales and customer relationship management and proposal writing. And I had to put my house up for a loan. And it's really interesting when you get that loan document and you're signing it down at the bottom, and that loan officer is sitting there saying, yep, you're on the hook for this. And my business partner had to take that risk too. In fact, I had 2 business partners, and our houses were up, as collateral for that loan. I was never really that worried, but it is a risk. And I was trying to think of the scenarios in which this could actually be a problem. And I didn't really come up until there was a couple of government shutdowns. I think over the last 20 years, we've been through 3 government shutdowns. And when the government shuts down, they stop paying contractors. And the contractors are encouraged to continue working. They call working at risk. And you are eventually, the shutdown, typically it's, political posturing, and it's wrapped up in 3 weeks, 4 weeks max. This last one went more than 2 months. And now it's like, I have all these employees, and now I started thinking about, wow, this is the scenario. This was a scenario they talked about. So that is a risk. Now, you can be sued. You can be sued for anything. You can be sued by your employers. You can be sued by your competitors. You can be sued by your subcontractors. Usually it's your company that's being sued, but there's a reason why they call certain lawsuits frivolous, and you may encounter those. I've heard some horror stories about this, so that's a risk. Because we're in aerospace and because we're a small business, we are a constant at risk for fraud, phishing, hacking, cybersecurity. I mean, no joke, there are foreign intelligence agents who comb all the aerospace industry sites, and they know who we are, and they look at where you are in the food chain, and we get hacking and phishing attempts daily, just daily. And this has really become a problem over the last 5 to 7 years. And if you work in GNC and P&T especially, there are these laws or regulations called ITAR and EAR where you can't sell certain technologies to foreign governments, foreign companies. So if you're going to be involved in aerospace, Lockheed can sell F-35s to pretty much whomever they want, but they have an army of lawyers, right? And they've got congressmen and they've got all these things that help make that happen. I probably couldn't sell a pack of gum to a foreign country without getting in trouble for it, so I don't. Lack of time for family and friends, and physical and mental health effects. I can tell you there's weeks where I've put in 60, 70 hours. I've worked over weekends. I've worked over holidays, and it wears you down. So you've got to find time to take care of yourself, your health, your own health, right? I have friends who have the best health care in the world, right? And they don't go to the doctor. I go to the doctor at least annually. I think about it. I got a family to take care of. Some lessons learned: have a business plan, especially an exit plan, and just be prepared. It doesn't have to be formal, right? It's just something you should have. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. This is when I'm going to do it. And especially from a financial standpoint. When I started Emergent, it was just me by myself. And I knew that I would have to go 2 months without pay until the money started to come in. And so I advanced our personal line of credit. I had the money in the account, paid mortgage, paid bills, and then the money started coming in. And it was in that manner, it was fairly easy to kind of bootstrap my company. But that's something you have to think about. How are you going to pay your own bills? Don't hope for success, expect it. You're going to go down the path of something that's very risky and challenging, and you need to puff your chest out. You need to get, a little swole. You got to expect that you're going to be successful at it, because the minute that doubt and fear creeps back into you, you might give up. And there was times in the company's history where I was really tired. I was tired of the losing. In fact, there was a contract we were on the losing end of where I was really close to selling the business. And a good friend who was another business owner and had a much bigger company kind of talked me off that ledge. And I got rejuvenated, and then the company took off again. And there's just times where, it's hard to overcome that. So be prepared for success. Think about being successful. Expect being successful. Like I said before, fear of failure will help motivate you. This is my favorite aphorisms from a good friend who, he was the division director at Johnson Space Center for the Guidance Navigation Control Division. His name is Dave Knipe, and he served on the External Advisor Committee. And this was back during the early days of Orion when it first started out. And he's like class of 57, Texas A&M, right? And I asked Dave, I said, Dave, you're like an old school Aggie. What are you doing here at the UT, committee? He goes, we're starting up Project Orion, and I want to hire the best there is. I said, I know, but you're old school Aggies. He said, football is football. Business is business. I'm here to hire the best. I've never forgotten that. And we've hired some Texas A&M graduates in the last several years, and they're all really smart, really good engineers. And you got to think to yourself, there's certain biases that we have that may affect business decisions we make, including hiring, that you've got to get beyond. You got to find good people, because that's what your companies are going to be made of, right? Good companies are comprised of good people. If you hire good people, you're going to have a good company. And if you don't hire good people, you're not going to have a good company. Hire people who are smarter than you. Someone told me that many, many years ago. And at first I was like, I don't know, man. That sounds like if they're smarter than me, they'll take over the company. And then it just occurred to me that if I always hire people who are smarter than me, which I've done and I've done successfully, I'm a really smart company. And that goes back to good companies are comprised of good people. So don't look for people who are going to be yes men or yes women, right? Don't look for people who are going to be always agreeing with you. Find people who will challenge you. Find people who will bring some different ideas, some different skill sets, some different experiences to your company, and then let them do their job. And I've seen this be a problem in our company and in other companies. If you're a good leader, you identify other leaders and you have to mentor and train them, right? And Clint and I were talking about this with respect to graduate students and PhD students earlier. If you want to get bigger, it's really to your advantage to grow your generation of leaders who are going to take over the things that you were doing. So as you get bigger and you rise up, you know, it's not easy to hire people from outside your organization and have them come in and understand your culture, understand your customers, and just buy in. It's really best to grow them from within. Good leaders sometimes follow, and good followers sometimes lead. You cannot have a company of all leaders, and you cannot have a company of all followers. So there are times when absolutely I have to lead, but there's other times when I've recognized I have to let other people lead, and especially lead people that work for them. Corporate culture is very important, and this is something I think it's been challenged by COVID, because you know, people want to be in a company where they like the people they work with, they like the management, they like the work. You know, we do things after work together. We have happy hours, we have picnics. You know, we do things that build a sense of camaraderie. And for a lot of people, that's very, very important. It's important for me, and I know it's important for a large majority of the people in our company. It takes years to build it, and you can only days to destroy it. It's something you have to nurture all the time. It's something that you just can't take for granted. So this goes back to the soft skills. You've got to be willing and able to reach out to people, especially people who are not naturally gregarious. They're not naturally outgoing, and they want to be a part of your organization. You've got to intentionally pull them in. Effective communications. How many people here read books? Like real books? That's a good thing, because I'm telling you, written word and spoken word are so important. And I think the written word especially, we work on proposals all the time. And I can tell you that a good proposal writer is worth their weight in gold. So if you're going to get into starting your own company, if you're going to be in part of management where you have to do sales and marketing and proposal writing, you're really going to have to develop your proposal writing skills. And the best way to do that is to read, because the more you read, the more you hear words used that you don't use regularly, and you're going to need them to communicate to your company and to your customers. Your most difficult problems are not going to be technical, they're going to be people, right? And as your company gets bigger, there's more people you have to deal with, and it's not an engineering problem you can solve. You can't, you know, state what's given and what needs to be done and give the equation and write it out and put the box around it, and then you solve it. You know, you have to work with people in a way that you may not be accustomed to doing. So, and at least one person in your company thinks you're brilliant, and at least one thinks you're a moron. And this goes back to, you know, you better grow a thick skin and don't burn any bridges. In our industry, at any one time, you can be a competitor and a teammate with a company, right? I mean, that happens a lot. And so you don't want to burn bridges with them, because you may be teamed up with them at another time. And we've had employees who've left our company, and they came back a couple years later and said, you know what, that other company I went to, didn't like them. Like you guys better, I'd like to come back. And I'm like, hey, come on back. There will be, when you get really big, and if, heck, you don't even have to be that big, there will be people, difficult people who, you know, sometimes you have to cut the disease out before it spreads to the rest of the body. This is a very hard lesson, by the way, because, you know, we've had some employees over 20 years where it was just better for them to leave. It just was. It was better for them. It was better for us. And I used to worry about having to lay people off, you know. And a good friend of mine who ran another company said, George, don't worry about laying people off. First thing you do is you're going to fire someone. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to fire someone? And I remember the first time I had to fire someone. It was not easy. It wasn't comfortable, but I had to do it. Like I said, you know, these are things that are come up as part of the business. And if you've never been fired, or you've never fired someone, this is not something you're prepared to do. But, you know, you get used to it after a while. Don't let your emotions drive your business decisions. This is really hard, because I'm I often have to tell myself, wait a day before you make a decision on something. Sleep over this before you make a decision on something, because when you're in a competitive industry and when you're with competitive people, even within your own company, sometimes it's better just to wait. Nothing is real until it's in writing. Customers will ask you to do things. Partners will pledge to do things. Unless it's written down on a contract, it's not real. Customers buy from people they know, they like, and they trust. So there are people that I know that I don't like. There's people that I know and I like, but I don't trust them. And there's people I know, I like, and I trust them, and I would do business with them. And the customers are the same way, right? I mean, it's hard for a company to come into a new, let's say a NASA center. No one knows who they are. They don't really know you, and then you get a contract right away. That's really hard. But after they get to know you and they like you, eventually you might get a contract. And then after years of executing and doing really well, they begin to trust you, and then your business starts to grow. So, these sales all come from individuals talking to the customers initially and then communicating it through proposals. So I consider those personal transactions. This is one that, this is actually a quote from a Shakespeare play. I think it's Henry IV. Uneasy is the head that wears the crown. It's hard to put your business down. When you get to 15, 20 people, and you have all these people that work for you, and they have mortgage payments, and they got kids in school, and you feel responsible for them, and you don't want to let them down. And the company gets bigger, and you have a lot of things going on in your life. You have your family, you got your business, and we went on a vacation once where we went to Yosemite, not Yosemite, Yellowstone National Park, and because you couldn't get cell phone service unless you're like in a lodge, your phone was dead. That was the first time I'd ever been away from the business for a week. And at first it was really uncomfortable because it was like, something's happening, something's blowing up, something's going wrong. But I had these good business partners, that were back home doing the work for me. I just felt, uncomfortable. And I can tell you this, you never get to put it away. You never get to put it down. So that's something that I didn't really know when I got into this. I've gotten used to it now. I can handle the load, I can handle the stress, but sometimes it's a challenge. And this is my favorite one of all. And my kids know this now too, because I've said it to them so often. If you don't network, you won't get work. And I hope that 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, you guys remember this, and you'll remember, oh yeah, I remember I was at this thing at University of Texas, and this guy, George Davis, was talking about his company. And he said, if you don't network, you won't get work. And what that means is if you just sit in your office all day and you don't go out and talk to anyone, you'll never get a contract for anything, right? You actually have to go out. You have to meet the customers. You have to meet the prime contractors and the competitors. You don't even know they're competitors yet. And you have to do this over and over and over. You've got to go to conferences and symposias. You've got to go to these events after work. You might be tired. You have to get out there and you have got to promote your company because no one else is going to do it for you. And over time, people get to know you. And LinkedIn, by the way, has really made that easier now. I mean, I wish that was around 20 years ago. When I first got the invitation to join LinkedIn, I'm like, what is this thing? And what am I supposed to do with it? Now I use it as I don't do Facebook, but I do LinkedIn. And people follow you and they know about you, they know about your company. You guys have a network, a small network right now because you're students, but you should be expanding that network. You should be growing that network. You should be going to conferences when you can. You should be meeting people online, and you should just build that network because that's eventually what's going to get your company known. All right, now I'm going to talk about the space economy because it's really changed. It's changed a lot, mainly because of SpaceX. And you think about what they've done in the last 20 years, it's just been revolutionary, right? I mean, they went from an idea to start a new company, to build a new rocket and compete against the United Launch Alliance, to landing the first stage on a ship. That's, that's just amazing. And that has changed the industry because first off, it showed that a small company out of nowhere could do this. Now, Elon Musk didn't really come out of nowhere. He had PayPal, but he didn't have anything, right? He had to go hire the senior engineers, the graybeards, if you will, and armies upon armies of undergraduates. This is like Apollo days, right? And they built that rocket, and this is what they've done. Now it's shown that companies can do things that previously it thought only government and large companies, large primes could do. And I think that's changed the perception for investors. So now investors are more willing to look at investing in space companies. Like, well, SpaceX has done it, and now other companies are putting up launch vehicles, they're building satellites. This has made it possible to have access to space, satellite buses and components. And now the space economy is estimated to be worth about $450 billion. And now capital is pouring into the industry. And if you want to start a company, now is the time to do it, right? I mean, there are companies, I see them all the time. If you guys don't read space news, I think you can sign up for it online and they'd send it to you daily and you don't have to buy the subscription. You just read about all the companies that are starting up, and a lot of them are software related. I'll get to that in a minute. We've got new customers, we've got new capabilities, and now as a result, the Austin has grown like by leaps and bounds. When we started our office here in 2009, I think there might have been 4 or 5 companies in the area, and now I think that's at least tripled. And it's growing every day. I think the future is software. And this is what I saw 20 years ago when I started Emergent, and now I think that future is coming about. Autonomy, distributed storage and computing, mesh networking, software-defined radios, cybersecurity. This is all for autonomous satellite systems, not just the constellations and clusters and formations that I originally wanted to start on, but like the 2-vehicle scenario, rendezvous, proximity operations and docks, satellite servicing, or even deep space. And these all require interdisciplinary teams to execute. So I want to give a shout out to the Cockrell School and to the department for being present on this and knowing years ago, Noel has done a tremendous job hiring faculty into the department that came from robotics and EE, and this is where the industry is going. And if you're an undergrad right now, consider getting a degree in computer science to add to your aerospace degree. A lot of our employees are doing that. They have undergrads in aerospace, and they're taking this online Georgia Tech course, and they're doing it at night while they're working their full-time job. They're going to come out with a computer science degree, a master's. And that combination of knowing aerospace algorithms with software and AI and machine learning and autonomy and cyber, that is a powerful combination. So there's never been a better time to be an aerospace engineer. And there's never been a better time to be an aerospace entrepreneur. I mean, this is what the future is going to be. And this is what you guys are going to get to work on in your careers. And I wished, no, I don't actually. I was going to say, I wish I was an undergraduate now and I got to be in the aerospace industry that you guys are joining in, because it wasn't nearly as cool back then, but actually I'm quite happy with where I am right now. We won't have to go back in time. But yeah, this is like going to be a golden age for aerospace. So thank you for your attention. And anybody have any questions? Todd.
Sage advice, George, from the horse's mouth. I'm wondering whether you think getting a Ph.D. is worth the effort when you're planning to go into entrepreneurship. I mean, wouldn't you think that a master's degree is perhaps the better investment per year, and that staying in for a PhD might kind of be overkill? Or in your case, because you got a PhD, have you really drawn on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've thought a lot about that recently, because I was recommending examples to my daughter who was thinking about whether she was going to go into engineering or not, and she ultimately decided to go into finance. And she's like, I just don't really not ever want to be an engineer. And I said, well, you know, the end state should be get your undergraduate degree in engineering, then go get an MBA, right, and combine those two, and then go start a company or do something entrepreneurial. And I think that's a good approach for a lot of people. It does, but it's not the only one, right? I think having a master's degree, for us in our company, it's that deeper layer of knowledge that you get in whether it's orbital mechanics or P&T or controls or whatever, right? That really helps you in your job and helps you understand the problems you're trying to solve. Do you need a PhD to start a company? No, right? A lot of the companies that are started by PhDs tend to be like in the physics and, like the real hard sciences. I think I've benefited from having my PhD in many ways. It gives me some instant credibility with certain customers. And I find particularly in the DoD and in the intelligence community, that gives you, a technical credibility that you may not gain otherwise. But you do have to think about the extra time that it takes to do. And I say that if time is not a forcing function, if money's not a forcing function, do that, skip the master's and go right for the PhD. Like that's really, I know there's some schools where that's possible. And I don't know if it's possible here, absolutely, yeah. So, but it also is like, I always had this idea that eventually I'm going to go back to academia, right? Like when I'm done with Emergent, when I'm done with the aerospace industry, I want to go back and teach. And I'm glad that I have the PhD for that reason. So there's not a one size fits all to that, but it's really, it's up to the individual. And I don't think you're doing yourself any harm by getting the PhD.
Thanks.
Thanks. That's really interesting. So I have a couple of questions. What is your view on, so your company started out providing services to NASA and versus, a company that's kind of capital intensive. You want to put up a new satellite, whatever, for some imaging purpose. Those seem like very different, types of companies.
They are.
And what is your, I don't know, view on that in terms of if you're an entrepreneur, which would be a, what are the differences in the paths you might take for those?
Yeah, if the business conditions that exist today were available in 2001, I think I would have done it differently. I think I would have went and found capital and started the company. When you do that, you give up equity, but then you get a lot more along the way. And so if you want to kind of accelerate the growth and you're willing to give up some of the ownership, and I look back on it now, it's like, I'd rather own 10% of a really, really big pie than 90% of a really, really small pie, right? But you don't need capital to start a services company, right? You just need one person. And, like I said, I took out a $10,000 personal loan, and within 4 months I paid it off, and it was like nothing. Now, as you grow, and we find now that like when you get these 25-person bumps, you're going to have to get a sufficient line of credit to pay for that. But if you guys have ideas about technology, right? I've got this technology that I want to create, and it might be software, which is a technology. I think going to capital markets is the way to do it. And I'm very interested to see what happens with Launch Texas, because I think all the conditions that you need to be successful in creating a second Silicon Valley, a new Silicon Valley, exist here in Austin, right? You already have a tech economy. You have world-class university here. You've got other world-class universities within a 200-mile radius, Texas A&M, Rice, Houston. I mean, everything that they had there, we have here. Now we got to get the investors to say, okay, I'm going to invest in these companies. Because I think the Stanford students, they just walk out of class and there's like, venture capitalists standing right there giving out business cards, looking for that next big thing, right? So yeah, that's it's like the capital route is the best way.
Okay, so I get this is a related question then, and it has to do with raising VC versus like becoming an SBIR company, right? And obviously we've heard some opinions on that from others about you go the SBIR route and it can be good because it can give you some infusion of cash, but it also you're doing someone else's problem in a sense. Whereas if you're raising capital, you can in a sense do what you want to do. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, sometimes the problem that you want to solve, lines up with the problem that the customer wants, and that's serendipitous when that happens. There's a trap that you can get into with the SBIR company where you get so good at doing them that you don't try to take it to that next level. And I've seen a number of companies, we call them SBIR mills, and for whatever reason, NASA has gotten smart to that now, and they've tried to kind of put out these metrics that they track to prevent that from happening. But if the point of the SBIR program is to provide seed capital for these very small companies, usually it's one or two people that couldn't even attract angel investment, right? It's a good place to start, right? But having got it, you should take that and then to the VC or the angel investor and say, look, I've got this contract and it shows that this customer is interested in it. And if you just put this money in, we could do these things. So it's a really good place to start. And the DoD has modified their SBIR program to basically bring in these, to reward you for bringing in the investors early. So they have these programs called TAC-FI and STRAT-FI. And if you have a technology or a need that they require, and you have capital that's coming in from the private industry, from the private sector, they will match sometimes 1-to-1 and sometimes 2-to-1. But you also have to have, like a program of record and someone at the 06 level or higher that endorses it, so that verifies it. Yeah, we need this. But I think if you can parlay those SBIR successes into something that attracts the private capital, that's a really good way to go. I mean, some companies have the luxury of not dealing with the government, and the government is not horrible. There's paperwork involved, right? I mean, that's the worst part of it, right? But they also have the biggest consumer of space goods and services. So, at some point, I remember Elon Musk famously saying that he didn't need NASA money to do his launch vehicle. And then it turns out that he did, or he took it, and I don't blame him for doing it, but the government was wanting to buy his capabilities. So yeah, having that endorsed through an SBIR contract is a good thing. It's a good place to start. And for the professors, there's a university component to SBIR. It's called STTR. And that is kind of an underserved element of that program. And that's another place where I think Launch Texas could help get some things started out.
Thank you.
But I can wait if any of the students have a question.
We need some students to ask questions. Do we have any interested entrepreneurs?
Quickly, I want to say for those watching online, feel free to ask your questions in the chat.
So this is a hypothetical question. Let's say you are working for a company and you sign some NDA agreement, right? And then you want to say, okay, I want to start my own company. Do you see any conflicts arise with, proprietary information and then starting your own company?
Yes, that can happen.
And how do you navigate through that?
So the way we do it as a company is when they start, we have this form they fill out that they can declare that they have some, proprietary information, right? They came up with this algorithm or this technology on their own in their garage and it's theirs. And we're like, yeah, just write it down. We've never been in a situation where we took theirs or wanted to take theirs or prevented them from taking theirs with them. I've heard that from other companies. So number one, if you join a company, make sure you go in with eyes wide open and tell them, hey, I have this thing, I've got this code, and it may even be relevant to a customer contract that we have, but it's mine, and I want it declared as mine, right? Now, what often happens is you hire an employee and they're working on something that's really interesting or cool, and they decide they want to leave the company and they want to start a company to do that thing. That's where the problem can arise, right? Like if we invested our own money, let's say through a research and development internal IR&D contract or project, and we invested our own money, I wouldn't want that employee then to take that thing that we paid for, right? But if they're working on a NASA contract and it's really the government that's paying for it, those things are all usually negotiable, right? But it's a very good question because this does arise quite frequently. And I should have said that, one of the good things, one of the best things, one of the first people you should engage when you have a company is a lawyer. You should find a lawyer and find an IP lawyer or a business lawyer. And that business lawyers usually know, contract lawyers usually know enough about IP just to kind of get them, to the hard stages. But be cognizant of what you know and when you know it, and make sure you write things down. Like I said, it's not real unless it's written down. So even promises you might have made with your bosses mean nothing unless you've got an agreement signed. I don't know if I answered your question or not. What often happens is you'll have a non-compete signed, and then you'll go work for another company, and the company you're working for will say you can't go work for that company. And what it turns out is that 99.9% of the cases, they cannot stop you from plying your trade. Basically, you're an aerospace engineer, and you're free to be an aerospace engineer wherever you want. Question?
I have a question from online. This is directed at you. You are an aerospace engineer who learned about software, but what should a student do if they're learning software engineering, but they're very interested in a job in the aerospace industry?
Even to just a few years ago, I would have said, and I learned this from the students, by the way, you can go online and find tutorials on orbital mechanics and controls and learn the jargon and learn just enough to talk your way through the interview. But right now we've had great success hiring people who are just software engineers. They don't need to know how the satellite flies, right? We have other people who know how the satellite flies. They need to write good software. They have to design it. Software designers are hard to find. Developers, testers, all these things, we need them. The industry needs them in abundance. And I just don't think not having aerospace experience is a hindrance anymore. So if this is coming from someone who is a software developer and wants to get into aerospace, and have them send a resume to us, because we're looking for people.
You did mention that once you started the company, you gave up on your technical side and you did mostly just sales and marketing. How do you avoid that? What if I want to continue doing the technical stuff and research and still want to do the company?
So you know what? You find someone to be your CEO. Okay, there are companies that I know of where the founder didn't want to run the company, and they wanted to stay technical, and they're the chief technologist. But I can tell you this: even if you're the chief technologist, you do not get to get away from writing proposals. You do not get to get away from doing sales and marketing. You do not get to get away from meeting with customers. You're still going to have all those responsibilities. You might be able to carve out time to really keep yourself technically sharp, but you're still going to have to do all these other things. Nobody at the executive level really gets to get away from having to be involved in marketing, sales, and proposal writing. So, but you could find someone who's really good at running the company and doing all those other things, right? Because you just don't have time to be an engineer anymore. So carve it out by finding someone else to do that for you.
Another question from online. Does Emergent hire international students studying in aerospace engineering?
Unfortunately, the answer is no. And it's very difficult. There was a PhD student here many years ago, and I can't remember his name. He was, I think, from Norway, and I think he was the first ASE astronaut. And yeah, so he wanted to work for us, and he gives me his resume, and I know he's sharp, he's brilliant. You look at his resume, and it's like, you know, this is Norway, right? I mean, it's not like on the list of countries you'd normally say absolutely not, right? And then we couldn't hire him, so he goes back to Europe, and then eventually he's like the first astronaut. And I brought this up in a, in a workshop. It was like I can't remember, it was a DoD where it's about, when it's hard to find people and you want to hire people out of universities that they're not citizens yet, but they intend to be citizens, right? Just that's the chicken and the egg thing. And I gave him that example of passing up on this guy that was who eventually was the first ASE astronaut. And it's like, those are the people we have to have them stay. But even getting on to NASA, a NASA center, getting a NASA badge and getting access to a NASA network is now almost impossible for a foreign national. And even with a permanent resident / green card holder, there could be weeks and delays. But we have classified programs we work on. We work on that for the DoD, and for our size company, it's just not. We're not able to handle it, right? I mean, I know companies that have immigration lawyers, and they're able to do things that we just can't do. We're not quite big enough for that. So unfortunately, and it hurts my heart because I know a lot of people who are really. You can't hire a Canadian, for heaven's sake, without having those exact same issues. So it's ridiculous, but it's the way the world is. That's the way the United States is right now.
Question over here, and then we'll have one more question, and then we should have our reception.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you talk about any tough business decisions you made, maybe what factors you have to weigh to make the decision, and who you seek for advice when you don't know how to make a decision?
Wow, let me think about that. I think a couple of the biggest decisions I've made was in these times where after we lost some contracts and I was really not happy with where things were going. I was on the brink of wanting to sell the company and just kind of doing something different. And I came back from that, and each time the company went up again. And I don't know if that was just luck or, I just reapplied myself. But I tend to run the company, through consensus with my business partners. And one of my business partners was a University of Texas graduate student, and he was a good friend of mine and a friend of the university. And we had 3 principal owners, and it was really easy for us to come to consensus and make decisions together. And he just recently passed away unexpectedly, which was a great loss, just for the company and for me personally. And now I have a business partner who he's been with me for 19 years, and he and I work easily together. And I think I know businesses that there's a sole owner, and I don't know who they go to for advice, but I've always had these 2 business partners and friends. That's one thing. When you start a company, it's like a second family, and it's like a marriage too. Like, you spend a lot of time with these people, and you go through some highs and you go through some lows. And I think that's the advantage of having business partners, because you can talk to them and think things through and come to decisions that I think as an individual, it would be really hard to make. I mean, one of the worst situations we ever were in was the last government shutdown, and you start looking at all the people in the company, and then you have you have to be prepared for what could happen. So what could have happened was that shutdown could have gone on for another month or two, and we would have had to lay people off. Who do you lay off first? In what order do you lay them off? You know? And we had to game that exercise. It's one of the worst things I've ever had to do, you know? Rank order all the people in your company, you know, and because if you're not ready to do that, you know, you could be caught flat-footed. Another hard decision was we were on the losing end of a contract early in the company's history, and I think there was only like 10 of us. And I didn't know this at the time, but in the services business, if contracts have like a 5-year cycle, and there's winners and losers, and sometimes the losers who are running the contract get displaced by the new companies, and those companies come in and they hire all those employees. This is how NASA and most of the big federal government contracts work. I didn't know that would happen. All of a sudden, like 6 of my employees were at risk for being hired by the winning company, and we had to, you know, give them raises. We had to give them stock options, and that kept the company together. We fended off this advance, and I went and talked to the new company that won and begged and pleaded, and they let us onto that contract. And you know, that was one of the best decisions we ever made. But it was like, you know, I got to give up equity now, and I was thrust into a situation that I wasn't prepared for. And someone had told me 2 weeks before that, you better be ready for this for happening, because I've been around a long time. These things can happen. So, you know, these decisions that you have to make, they're personal, because they're people that work for you, you know. And I talk a lot about these things with my wife as well, you know, and my kids, you know, who's ever in the car where we're driving somewhere, it's like, you know, I start talking about the company, and then they say, well, this is what you should think about, or this is what you should do. So lean on family, lean on your business partners, you know, and you're not always going to make the right decision, and you can't keep everyone happy. That thing I said about someone's going to think you're brilliant and someone's going to think you're a moron. You know, you can't make everyone happy. So you just try to think about what is best for the majority, and then you make that decision and you go forward. You don't look back.
I have an online question. This is from George's son.
Oh.
You are a rock star to your family and a continuous source of inspiration. Could you speak more about business development, specifically towing the line when discussing capabilities, as to not appear as a possible competitor, but rather a potential business partner?
Wow, well, thank you, son. I appreciate that. It's really kind. No, it was not. We call it the kabuki dance, right? When you're in a business development situation and you're not sure who your competitors are or who your potential partners are, you have to have these conversations where you're trying to give out the minimum amount of information while you try to pull in the maximum amount of information. And you know, you have to appear independent and not committed to one way or the other, and it's not easy to do. And I've never lied in a business situation. I've been on the receiving end of lies before, you know, and I've seen other people lie. I've withheld information, right? And a good friend of mine who Chad Brinkley, who did business development down in Houston, and he has some companies that they've invested in now. I remember him asking me, it's like, because we were talking about this contract at JSC, he goes, and he asked me a very direct question. He goes, aren't you willing to share information? And I thought about that. I'm like, huh. I said, are you willing to share information? He goes, yeah. Like, okay. So then we shared the information that we knew. And, you know, in the end, we both learned a little bit more about the contract, and I learned a little bit more about what his competitive posture was, and he learned a little more about ours, but it didn't change in the end whose team we were on and whether we won or lost. So business development is it's an interesting kind of sales skill. You're not selling product, you're selling capabilities. And you have to learn to have these weird conversations with people where you're talking about things and you're really not talking about the thing that you want to ask. And all you can do is practice. All you can do is do it. And it takes a long time to get good at it. And that's all I can say. It's challenging. You know what? I love people who drink beer and are funny. And so I do a lot of business that way. And you know, after a couple of beers, people loosen up a little bit and they're willing to talk about things that they weren't maybe willing to talk about before. But you know what? I feel like if we're going to be slugging out in this competitive industry, we might as well have fun doing it. So, you know, the pie is big enough for everyone. There's enough out there for everyone to be successful. And I think there's certain companies and certain people within certain companies that take it too seriously. Have you ever heard of The Art of War by Sun Tzu? Right? This was like business 101 for the 1980s. And there's some guys that read that book and they still to this day, 30 years later, that's how they run their business and that's how they deal with companies. And that's just not me.
One more question.
So I think you mentioned earlier about, and I've heard this from other people, that more people is not always better. So for your company, do you intend to expand by adding more people and expanding your company with what you do, or keep it to a minimum, and why?
So if you're in a pure services company, more is always better, right? You're basically selling support, engineering services, hours, which generates dollars and profit, right? If you're selling, you know, a product, I could certainly understand that more may not, you know, necessarily be better. This is where having a CFO, you know, and someone who can do the financial analysis to determine, you know, if we're going to do this, it's going to cost this much, and we're going to need to generate this much revenue to pay for it, and what's the return on that investment, right? And that's something that I think as engineers, we don't always think about, right? We think, oh, I got this really cool idea that I want to work on. It's like, it's the best thing ever. And then someone will say, well, what's it going to cost to do it? And what's that return on investment? And so getting bigger is not always better, but you better have the financial data to do that analysis, to back it up, right? Because I would highly recommend not getting bigger without, you know, understanding what the implications are. You know, we just won a big contract last year where we added 25 people to the company, which is great, right? But then you got to finance that 25 people. That's 25 people who you're going to pay on average $125,000 per year, you know, divide that by 12 and multiply that 20. That's the monthly for at least 60 days and maybe 90 without getting paid. And so you have to have the line of credit to support that. And we're still paying that down. So, you know, it was a good investment, but then we realized, oh, okay, there is a financial result. I'm going to say consequence, but, you know, I don't know that we did all that analysis. I'm glad we did it. But now I know that if you hire 50 people or 100 people, you know, you better be financially prepared for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys. If you have any other questions and you want to stick around, I'll be at the reception.